everyone. Many ESL writing teachers, especially in academic ESL programs, like to have their students do peer editing of their essays before they turn them in to the teacher. I recently had a conversation with a colleague who wanted some advice about how to do this better.
David, I use a peer editing form like this with my students. Today, my students just finished doing a session with a classmate. And after class, one of them told me that she thought her partner was kind of rude. She said he was too critical and told me to change my grammar in places that were not wrong. He also told me to change my thesis statement, but I think I already had a good one. And then a little bit later, I asked another student how his peer editing went, and he said, my peer editor read my essay and filled out the checklist. She said she found nothing that needed to be improved. I was surprised because I think there were some parts that were weak.
I see.
I feel like I should have my students do peer editing, but I'm not really sure what the purpose is or if it's really a good use of time. I question how much it really helps students develop their skills. What do you think?
You're not alone in questioning the value of peer editing, especially how it's been done traditionally. But there is a peer editing process which can alleviate the problem of the overcritical editor and underinvolved one. In this process, the peer editor is not expected to find places to improve. Instead, the writer solicits specific advice. In other words, the writer has control over the process.
Interesting. So you think that there is a benefit to doing peer editing?
I think students like to see their classmates writing, so peer editing gives them that opportunity. But students aren't trained to be editors, so asking them to check their classmates' grammar, organization, and content seems worse than a waste of time. Like your students' reactions, it can be a scarring experience.
I agree. So can you take me through the steps that I should follow?
I'd be happy to. First, you'll want to demonstrate how they will do this peer editing. As I said, they will not be given a classmate's paper and told to check for mistakes or to tell their partner how to improve it. Instead, each student will decide specific parts that they'd like some peer advice. So I do a little exercise like this one. I give this to the students. So you can see there's a little 2 paragraph essay here. And so to do this, I'll just, let's look at the introduction. So my friend Abdul from Malaysia told me about an experience that he once had when he was in high school. In this essay, I will tell Abdul's story and what I learned from it. So you can see there's in this paragraph, there's little numbers, and those numbers correspond to a question that the writer has that he would like some peer advice about. So my friend Abdul from Malaysia told me about an experience. There's a little number 1. Then we look at the bottom, at the bottom of this little paper, and you can see the directions say writer's questions to ask appear orally. For this practice exercise, you will write your responses. So we go number 1. It says, look at the place on my essay where I marked 1. Should I tell what kind of experience it was? For example, exciting, sad, or frightening? And so students will write down what they think. And then you can see it continues. There's a little number 2, and it says, in this essay, I will tell Abdul's story and what I learned from it. And then down at the bottom is item 2. How can I improve the introduction? Where it says number 2. And so they write their little, what their advice would be. And then it continues for this little exercise. I've got 2 more. So this shows them how I'm going to want them to do their peer editing with the paper they wrote. If you'd like to see the complete exercise, and in fact use it with your students, I'll include in the notes below a link that you can go to download the complete exercise for free and find out more exercises just like this.
So for peer editing practice, you don't just give students a sample essay and tell them to try to edit the grammar and explain how they'd improve the content.
That's right. They just imagine that their classmate has asked them these specific questions that they'd like some advice about. And this exercise serves as a model for how they will do peer editing on the essay that they had just written. They think about parts of their essay that they'd like some advice about. These could be about the grammar in some sentences, or about the clarity of an example, or about a need to add details, etc. Then they write numbers next to sentences in those parts, and on a different piece of paper, they write their questions.
Okay, then you match them with a partner, is that right?
Yes, and the first thing they do is to exchange essays and silently read them. One thing some students tend to do in this first step is to immediately start to edit grammar mistakes that they've noticed in their partner's paper. So I carefully watch to remind them not to do anything except answer the questions that their partner asks them. I've noticed that in these cases, both partners seem relieved. The writers don't have to worry that their partner is changing things on their paper that they didn't want changed, and the editors don't feel pressure to find things on their partner's paper.
Those are important points. So after they silently read the essay, do they exchange their questions and write their advice?
No, we want this to be an interaction. So one partner will orally read his or her questions. That way, the peer editor can verbally explain what they recommend and why. And the writer can decide if he or she wants to make the change. Also, this is important. The editor only gives advice that the writer asks for. And then they reverse roles.
Great. I have a question about how do you pair the students? Do you try to match good writers with weaker ones so that the weaker ones can get more help?
Actually, I do the opposite. I don't think that would be fair to the better writers. The better writers would probably be able to help the weaker writers, but the weaker ones probably wouldn't be able to reciprocate very much. Those better writers are not paying tuition to be tutors of the weaker writers. So I try to match students up with others who tend to have similar writing skills.
I understand your point, but I wonder how much the weaker writers will really be able to help each other.
Well, let's look at the purpose of peer editing. It's not really to help each other improve their writing. That's the teacher's job. It's more about letting them see how their classmates write. And, if they actually get some ideas for improving their papers, that's just a bonus.
I see.
I've noticed a byproduct from this approach to peer editing. Before I started doing this kind of peer editing, in which they had to focus on specific parts of an essay that they wanted advice for, sometimes students would show me an early draft of an essay and ask me to read it and tell them how to improve it. And of course, I would tell them that I'll do that on their final draft. But now, after doing this new peer editing approach, and they actually apply some critical thinking. So when they ask me for advice on an early draft, they will point to specific sentences or parts of their paper that they'd like my help with, and I'm happy to do that. Another byproduct is what I've often seen happen after a peer editing session. Many of them will go up to a different classmate, and point to specific parts of their essay and ask them for their advice.
That's great. And like you said, to do that takes some critical thinking skills. And I imagine that this is something that they will do in future courses in which they write papers.
That's true. So that's how you can have your students do peer editing in which the writer has control over what advice they get. Thank you for watching.